do want to spend part of my time, because I am here speaking, and this is my story, but over the past several days, and even when this story initially came out, there have been other CBC employees, current and former, that have come forward to me that are afraid to speak out publicly, and they have sent me some statements. So I'd like to, if I can, read into the record some of what I have been getting from current and former employees. This is a current employee at the CBC. I've been with CBC for 10 years, and I have witnessed and experienced multiple incidents of the misuse of taxpayer dollars, racism, favoritism, nepotism, sexual harassment, and verbal abuse. And then she goes on to outline specific examples. This next individual was someone that you would all know if I said their name. They left the CBC after a 10-year career. The end of their statement says, "Without exaggeration, I experienced toxicity every single day, and it was almost always from the same people. It was not subtle. It was not hidden. It was part of the daily reality of working there." She goes on to say that she was set to interview Catherine Tate on air. "I introduced myself to her in the makeup room as the host. In front of others, she responded, 'I didn't know I'd be interviewed by somebody who looks like she is 14. That moment stayed with me. It was dismissive, inappropriate, and reflected a broader culture in which respect was not always equally extended to everyone." On Mr. Cochrane, this is one of his former producers. "His toxic behavior extended beyond editorial matters and was more often than not deeply hypocritical. While he publicly presented himself as a supporter of diversity, he actively undermined the contributions of colleagues who were minorities." This is somebody who left the industry and had to go to another country. "After about a year of working there as an anchor," this is in Vancouver, "I was suddenly removed from the anchor desk. I was told the decision was related to the color of my skin, that as a white person, I did not fit the diversity targets they were trying to meet. No concerns about my performance had ever been raised. My concern was the system and the reasoning behind the decision. My frustration was never directed at the individual who stepped into the role." She was also said that she was forced to check a box if somebody of a diverse background appeared on the air, and she said that that was concerning to her. "I believe it's important to include a broad range of voices and perspectives, but reducing interview subjects to a checkbox felt like an overly simplistic way of approaching something that deserves much more care and thought." And I can go on. There are a number of these stories, and it is shocking. These people have been traumatized. They are scared to come out. They are scared of the professional repercussions. And management, like Andre Lau, like Brody Fenlon, like Kathy Perry, like Chris Carter, they are concerned about protecting the reputation of the organization as opposed to dealing with these issues when it comes to employees.
So, Mr. Dhanraj, during your time there, can you just outline what years were you there?
I was there. I finished at Global, I think, in 2021. It's in the bio that I provided.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
And then I came to Ottawa. I was a parliamentary reporter. I flew around with the Prime Minister. I covered Parliament Hill. I was. Then I went back to Toronto. I was on Marketplace. I covered the Queen's funeral, and then I got my own show, which I thought I'd have some say in terms of how that show went. And on the intersection panel. This is a picture here of all the folks that we had on the panel. We've got here one with Raheem Mohammed and Rachel Gilmore. I don't know if you can get two people very far apart on the ideological spectrum as that. Sheila Copps, Brian Lilly, and Faye Johnston, right? We were having the Canadian conversation, and this panel was canceled. And you also have issues of pay equity when it comes to all of these folks.
So obviously your point here was to create a panel that was full of diversity, not just in skin color or ethnicity or religious background perhaps, but you wanted diversity of thought.
Correct.
Were you given the journalistic freedom then to move forward and do that for the sake of the Canadian public?
No, I mean, the issue became with the panelists. We had a list of 43 people or 45 people that Power and Politics gave us that said, do not go near these people, right? And some of these folks were like reporters, like Robert Benzie. There's a story breaking at Queen's Park, and we're on at 7 o'clock. We should be able to call, somebody who covers Queen's Park and talk to them. But there were these continued hurdles and roadblocks that were set up to really have a certain group of folks in Ottawa in control of who was allowed on programs. Particularly mine was a concern. And there were repeated episodes of conservatives being blocked. I mean, I have the G chats right here. I said, in terms of getting folks on, that we need to have balance. This is not about just having a show with conservatives or just with liberals. But if Power and Politics is going to have liberals talking points on all the time, we should have balance as a network. And I said, we are in contravention of Section 11 of, I told Brody Fenlon this, and also Andre Lau, repeatedly. We are in contravention of the Broadcasting Act if we are not providing equitable time for all perspectives. So I don't want to flood the show with conservatives, but I do want to have balance. And there are, and this is all, I can talk to my legal team because some of this is before the Human Rights Commission in terms of how this happened, but there were repeated attempts over and over and over again. At one point, I heard, okay, well, maybe you can have NDP folks on, but conservatives are a no. It should blow the Canadian public's mind that this was the stuff that was going on. What I was attempting to do on this program was have that diversity of opinion. And, when they canceled the panel, I sent a note to panelists asking for feedback. And I was disciplined for that. And I just want to talk about this NDA that I got, because it's important, because I was raising concerns about editorial, and I was slapped with this NDA here, which is a practice that the CBC is using frequently, which was raised by Dave Seglins, and you guys all have the paper. Dhanraj has considered whether he has a human rights complaint with respect to the issues in dispute, and by his signature below confirms that he does not. Further, he confirms that he seeks no right or remedy under the Canadian Human Rights Act as amended with respect to the issues in dispute, and any such claim is barred by this agreement. That should be shocking to every member on this committee. And I hope that other members on the committee take an interest in terms of the issues that I'm outlining here, because it is very important. We should not have a public institution silencing their own employees and having them waive their rights under the Canadian Human Rights Act. That should be shocking.
Getting back to the bigger issue of the fairness and balance in news, you mentioned at one point that CBC management actually prevented you from interviewing conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on your show. Can you describe what happened there?
Yeah, well, I basically wasn't allowed to pick up the phone and talk to conservatives. I have some G chats here, which I just want to, read you part of this. I'm talking to my senior producer. I'm saying, okay, this is an editorial discussion. Can we get a conservative perspective on this, is essentially what I'm saying. It is a no to the conservatives, I'm told. We can't chase anyone from the entire party. The chase is with PNP. So if Power and Politics is not able to secure a conservative or somebody that presents an alternate perspective, then we are not allowed to. I'm told at one point, we're sure that there's a myriad of other types of interesting guests that you can chase outside of the conservatives. Can I be included on conversations with Power and Politics? That's not how we work. I say to management, by playing petty office politics, we feed into conservative narratives that we have a bias against them. Canada Tonight is a melting pot of news of the day, and politics and decisions from it largely impact Canadians. So we need flexibility to respond to emerging stories. So yes, I wasn't even allowed to pick up the phone and call to request Pierre Poilievre. Look at what happened when I had Melissa Lantzman on my show, right? I was threatened to be pulled off the air, which CBC then said in a news statement they didn't threaten to do that. There are recordings of them trying to do this.
Why do you think they were doing that?
I mean, there's an effort to essentially protect those in Ottawa in terms of their perspectives on these things, in terms of who they want on the show. It should be about, we did an interview with Karen Johnson, my co-host on the new podcast I'm doing. It is out right now. She's another former CBC employee that is talking about the toxic culture. She said that she alleges that she was called a brown Barbie, a bimbo, but she says that it's a very high school culture. And these are things that this is fine. If you have hosts doing that, it's not fine, but okay. But management, you are responsible for dealing with it. And so if management is not going to do anything, if the president of the CBC is going to come here and expect a tongue lashing and then be able to go back to the CBC and continue to get funding without accountability, these practices will continue. So shame is clearly not enough to get the CBC to a place where they will hold themselves accountable. So it's incumbent upon this committee to do that.
Ms. During your time, or do you have knowledge of the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, ever talking to the CBC with regard to how a news angle should be covered or taken, or content that should be reported on?
I know concerns were raised. I know concerns were raised from people that were on Power and Politics. I have documentation related to those concerns being raised. And I know that the folks that raised these concerns, they're fearful of, exactly the same thing that all these other folks are fearful of, right? Professional reprisal. But I also know that this was raised repeatedly. And whether or not there was influence from the former Prime Minister's office in terms of editorial decisions that were being made on Power and Politics or not, even the allegation of that on its face needs to be investigated. And from my understanding, and CBC can put out a statement correcting me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think that there was ever an investigation. That is a serious concern, right? I mean, if there are repeated, allegations made about perhaps there's too much influence here. Now, let me just say this as well. I was a reporter in Ottawa. I've been at Queen's Park. I was the Queen's Park bureau chief for Global. Reporters have sources. We all know that. But there's a line where that leads into editorial decision-making, and you have to make sure that that is clear. And if there's even an allegation that may have been crossed, you have to look deeper.
So I guess to that end then, we know that public trust toward the media in general is on the decline. We know that that is true with the CBC. There's no exception there. In your mind then, is that lack of trust justified?
I think that right now, the CBC, by continuing to put out statements and to come to these committees and say, yeah, we might have a little bit of a problem, but, overall, we're not biased. That's gaslighting Canadians. Canadians can see that this is an issue, right? And this is folks have accused me of coming here being a cheerleader for the Conservatives. I am not a cheerleader for the Conservatives. I'm sorry. I'm not a cheerleader for the Liberals either. I was trying to do my job as a journalist, and part of that is being balanced. And so when you have, when I was pulled into these disciplinary meetings, I was told that it was editorializing because I put that Catherine Tate wouldn't come on the program, and it's unfortunate. This is unfortunate, was editorializing, right? And it was perceived bias. There's a lot of perceived bias going on that I don't see any discipline around. So I think CBC needs to have, a wake-up call here in terms of accountability. And really, that's incumbent upon this committee. I have made recommendations. There are 11 recommendations in terms of how to, move some of this forward. When it came to Mr. Cochrane, this is during the convoy, for example. We were talking about Tamara Litch, who was an individual who was involved in the convoy. We were doing a story around that. And off-the-hand remarks can be made at times. And I said, I think that she has a couple of different last names. People who live in trailers usually do. You know, okay, off-color remark, but if this is a pattern, right, you have to, if your staff on your own show are raising this, if people are leaving the program, you have to look a little bit deeper into it, as opposed to pulling me off the air for saying it's unfortunate the president didn't come on the show.
So the Canadian public is paying for this to the tune of about $1.4 billion. And then, of course, the government also increased that by an additional $150 million. At the end of the day, then, the public is the shareholder and also the ones that are supposed to be benefiting from this news coverage. In your estimation, what changes are needed to actually restore that trust?
Well, I think that there needs to be an overhaul when it comes to management. You know, you have my specific recommendations, but I will also say this. I am not here as somebody who does not believe in public broadcasting. I was on Jonavision. I started as an audience coordinator when I was 19 years old at the CBC. I worked on the Air Farce. I worked on the Red Green Show. I then left. I came back. I worked at CBC Edmonton. I worked at CBC Toronto. Left. Came back again. I took a pay cut to come back to the CBC. I used to walk around the CBC Broadcast Center when I was 19 years old and sneak into the newsroom, and I thought, I want to be at this place at some point. This is the heart of this building, the news organization. And it has gotten so far away from what it was. The CBC should not be a polarizing force. It needs to bring Canadians together, and it has the infrastructure to be able to do that. But until there's a recognition of the problem from management, nothing will happen. And they fail to recognize this. I would be willing to sit down tomorrow with the new president to talk about some of this stuff, right? But good people are leaving, they're being forced out, and their concerns are being dismissed because it's about protecting reputation. Well, here's some news. I don't have to be wanting to destroy the CBC because management and executives are doing a great job of that on their own.
Thank